All right, guys. So welcome to tonight's mastermind. Lovely to have everybody here as always. Last few weeks we've been looking at just kind of general techniques and that kind of thing, and some of the heavier compound movements. So we had a look through squats a couple of weeks ago. We had a look through deadlifts. We had a look at push-ups as well on the squat week, because I know that there's a big push-up challenge going on at the moment. So it's kind of nice to have a little idea on how to do that and how to progress it. We can always go over that again at some point if you guys like. But as I say, the last couple of weeks we've been looking at squats and deadlifts and this kind of thing, and they share quite a lot in terms of like muscles used and also some of the basic concepts that we apply. And some of these concepts, I'm going to ask you a similar question to have asked you both of the previous weeks. Some of these questions are kind of similar answers for tonight's mastermind. So we're looking at bench and military press tonight. But it's not necessarily as straightforward, it's not necessarily as obvious with kind of upper body movements. So we'll get into it, and I want you just to kind of interrupt and ask any questions that you've got as we go through. Give me 2 seconds, I will share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah, fantastic, good. Great stuff. Okay, so yeah, as I said, we're going to have a look at bench and military press tonight. Has anybody got bench in the program currently?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Couple of you, fantastic, good. So some of you may not, some of you may have something more like a floor press, some of you may have things like dumbbell chest press, this sorts of thing. And it is very similar concepts. It's going to present differently, but we can still kind of apply the same concepts to it. If you don't have any bench or any military press or anything like that in your program, you will have some sorts of kind of pressing movements. So some of these concepts can be applied there. It depends what it is. So you may have, or you're likely to have, a lot of push-ups going on at the moment. We use kind of slightly different techniques whenever we go through that, and we had a look at technique for that a couple of weeks back. But if you do have any push-up specific questions as we go through, feel free to ask. So we're also using quite similar muscle groups, but there are a few differences from kind of bench press and push-ups. Okay, so and don't worry if you don't have either of those in your program, you will have one or the other in your program at some point. You will have some sort of pressing movement. So this is going to be useful info if you just start thinking about in preparation for having that in your plan, even if it's not there currently. Okay, cool. So we're going to have a little look at both of the movements to start off with. So we'll have a look through some bench, and we'll have a look through some military press, just so you guys can kind of visualize what's going on. Oh, can you still hear me there? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Zoom just told me I'd been signed out, but apparently not. So that's good. Right. We'll crack on. That was mildly worrying, but there we go. Right. Okay. So bench press. Okay, so we're referring to flat bench press here. There's lots of different types. I'm doing some pause bench press in this demo. There's lots of different types of bench press, but usually if we just say bench press, we're referring to flat barbell bench press. Okay, so what you guys can do, I'm just going to keep this video kind of playing on a little bit of a loop, and you guys can shout out some things that you notice about my technique, and then we'll just go through it bit by bit, and we'll kind of recap at the end.
You've got your shoulders back and flat.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so you're noticing that the shoulders are kind of pulled down into the bench.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really good observation there. Yeah, definitely. So what Liz is saying, you can see the shoulders are really kind of pinned into the bench there. Yeah, that's good.
Yep. Pushing off with your feet.
Yeah, okay, so you can see that there's a little bit of kind of legs, a bit of leg action going on there as well. Yeah, absolutely. Your legs can play quite an important part in bench. So yeah, definitely.
Arched back.
Yeah, arched back. Yes, I've got my back in quite an extended position. I'm a little bit hypermobile, so for me it's maybe a little bit more exaggerated than it might be on some other people. But yeah, absolutely quite an arched position. Yeah, definitely.
And the weight is directly above your shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you're kind of looking at it whenever I'm in that top position there.
Yeah.
We'll play that again. I'll
It's
try and
back.
pause it. So you're meaning kind of here?
With your shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the weight's kind of hovering directly above my shoulder. Yeah, yeah, really good. Yeah, awesome. All really good points here, guys. Yeah. Anything else? I'm not looking for anything specific, by the way. Just anything that you guys notice, and then we'll go through.
You know, something that you wouldn't notice is the breathing.
Is there
the breathing? When you breathe, is that important as well?
Breathing, definitely. It can contribute. I mean, if you want to get the most out of your bench, there's some very kind of specific techniques that we can utilize with breathing, but it can be a useful exercise regardless of if you kind of breathe during it or. I actually, for this set here, I didn't breathe at all, so I've got my breath held the entire time. So I breathe out a big sigh of relief after I put it back into that rack. So yeah, I don't breathe at all, which is why I look slightly red in the face. But yeah, absolutely, it does make quite a big difference, the breathing. So we'll cover that as well. It's a really good point.
And it's quite a fast movement.
Yeah, quite explosive. So I'm trying to be really nice and explosive with it on the way up, especially. Yeah.
And the bar down to your chest.
Yep, bar touching the chest. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic, guys. Great, cool. Right, mastermind done then. I think you've covered it. That's good. That's genuinely some really good points there, guys. And I think if you just kind of tuned into the mastermind, you just heard all those points at the start, I think it would kind of stand you in pretty good stead when it comes to bench press technique. So that's fantastic that you're already thinking about all these things and noticing all of these things. Really good, guys. Well done. Cool. Okay, we'll have a look. Sorry, Judith, you've got a question.
Yeah, just to ask, I know last week when you were talking about the other exercise, you had one hand going one way and one hand going the other way. Is it always both the same way with a bench press?
Yes. Yeah. So this will be for deadlift, and specifically when we're trying to lift a heavy weight on a deadlift. So that it's basically, if you were to grip it double overhand on a really heavy deadlift, you wouldn't be able to grip it. You would just end up letting go, and because you're not going to be able to lift the same weight with your grip as you can with your legs, essentially. So that's why we switch it to over and under. So if you think about it, if I'm holding the bar here, it can unravel my hands, the bar spins. Okay, so the bar can unravel my hands. Okay, and if I turn around this way as well, it can still unravel my hands. Whereas if I'm like this, it can't unravel my hands because it would have to spin this way to unravel my hand on this side, and it would have to spin the other way to unravel the hand on the other side, if that makes sense. So it can't spin two ways at once. So you're just gripping a solid object at that point that can't move. So that's why we do that on a deadlift. But on a bench press, because we're underneath it, even if I opened my hands up, whilst that might be a little bit dangerous in case it rolled off, right, leaving that aside, if I open my hands up, it would just sit on my hands. So I'm not actually struggling to grip it. I'm just kind of keeping it balanced there in the hands. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. But really good point about grip. So yeah, we'll definitely have a chat about grip and some grips that you guys might like to use whenever you're benching, for sure. Okay, cool. So we'll look at some military press. So I'll let you guys watch through to start off with, and then I'll just let it play on the loop again, and we can have a chat about some techniques. Okay, so I'll let that play on a loop, guys. So you tell me what do you notice technique-wise?
It's the floor.
Say again there, Hayley, sorry?
Sorry. Your feet are flat and anchored to the floor.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry to hear you've lost your voice there, Hayley. Hope you're feeling better soon. Yeah, really good point. So yeah, feet absolutely kind of glued nice and flat to the floor. Yeah. So this is what makes it a kind of strict press. So you might see some people doing like a push press, for example, and you'll see them come up onto the toes, and that's absolutely fine. But for a military press, as Hayley's saying, yeah, we want them to stay really solid and glued to the floor. Yeah, really good. Anything else?
Your hips, shoulders and ankles are all in line.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, so we're trying to keep all that stuff in line. Anything else that's in line with that? So you're imagining your, oops, sorry.
Yeah, the barbell one is at the top.
So yes, absolutely, yes. So I'll pause it at the top. There we go. So you're imagining a kind of vertical line. So you said hips, ankles, and shoulders.
Shoulders,
And
yeah.
then,
And then the bar at the top.
yeah, so yeah,
arms,
elbows, wrists, barbell, absolutely.
Yeah.
So like everything in a big kind of straight line there as you come down. Yeah, really good. No, I agree with that. Absolutely, very good observation.
So the arms are, as they go up straight. They're not only halves, they're fully extended.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we're kind of locking out those elbows at the top. Yeah, definitely.
And the legs, you haven't bent them this like straight.
Yeah, so legs are staying really solid. Yeah, so there's not we're not using any legs for this. So we're not doing a push press. We're doing a military press. Yeah, absolutely, keeping the legs really solid. My knees are like, because I'm hypermobile, you can see my knees hyperextend a little bit. So not everyone's knees can look like that. But this is me keeping my legs nice and solid. Yeah. I know they don't look very solid, but yeah, I get that kind of slightly bent the wrong way shape in the legs. But yeah, really, really solid legs. This one we don't move them at all. Say again, sorry.
So it's fine to lock your knees for that.
Absolutely, yeah. In general, it's fine to lock your knees. I mean, if somebody is as kind of hypermobile as myself, you might find that you get a bit of discomfort with it, or it puts you in a position where your muscles can't really control it anymore, and it's more just relying on like that stability at end range caused by the joints and ligaments and all the rest of it. So if someone's really hypermobile, then it's perhaps not a good idea to do, depending on the specific movement. But in general, like knees and elbows and everything, they're made to lock. So provided we're using appropriate loading and we're not pushing them beyond limits or anything like that, like it's okay to lock knees and elbows and all the rest of it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't see it in the video, Tristan, but are your feet together or a foot width apart, or how far apart are your feet?
Yeah, good question. So I've got my feet maybe a little bit wider than hip width apart there, just a little bit wider than hip width. Now, that is not to say that everybody must have their feet a little bit wider than hip width. It very much depends on what feels comfortable and solid for you. So I find I feel a little bit more comfortable, definitely a bit more stable with a bit of a wider stance. But the same might not be true for you. Do you notice anything about my forearms? Wait a second, I'll pause it. So here, do you notice anything about my forearms?
So
90
they're
degrees.
right
angles.
Yes, to go like
forearms vertical all points, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, no, you're all right there. So yeah, the angle of the forearms. So we've got the forearms kind of angled, pointing in the direction we want the barbell to go. Say if that barbell was to come down in front of me a little bit more, I were to lower it in front of me, my elbows are going to start coming back, and I'm going to end up, wait till we get in position. So I'm meant to be about here. Right, if I bring it down a bit further, I end up about here with the forearm. What's the problem with my forearm being here?
You're
not going to get it up. You're not going to get the push.
Absolutely, yeah. And what muscles are loaded up? So if I've got my forearm in this position, what muscle loads? Imagine I've got a big weight pushing down like this on me.
Your biceps.
Biceps are starting to get loaded. Yeah, absolutely. Biceps, and then one that I wouldn't necessarily expect you to know, but your wrist extensors there as well. So everything in your arm here is getting loaded, and the muscles in your shoulders not really getting loaded anymore, and your triceps definitely not. So you are relying on your biceps being able to hold a load that you could potentially press. So your biceps are going to be significantly weaker than what you can press overhead. So for example, I can military press significantly more than I can bicep curl. Okay. So if I've got a weight there and I'm military pressing it and I bring it too far down in front, then I'm kind of your body won't let you do that whenever the weight gets so heavy, because you'll feel if I go that way, the weight's falling down and it's falling off of me. So when it does start to get much heavier, that'll feel really awkward to do. But what tends to happen is when the weight is so light, to start off with, when you're trying to get a feel for the movement, when the forearms start to kind of tilt that way a little bit, then you'll sometimes find that you don't really feel that to the same extent. You don't feel like that's wrong. You don't feel like the weight's going to fall off or anything like that, and then it develops this kind of bad habit. So yeah, we always want to be kind of here, thinking about the direction that we're pushing. We never want to let it come back down in front of us like this. Good stuff, guys. Cool. Okay, fantastic. So really good points on both. You've done my job for me here tonight, guys, which is great. We're going to have a look at bench to start off with. So I'm going to ask you the question: what are the two things that we look for important for every lift? So this is the same question with the same answer as the last couple of weeks when we were talking about squats and deadlifts.
Balance.
Centre of mass.
Balance, absolutely, yeah. And do you say centre of mass there, Hayley? Yes, that's a
Yeah.
component of balance. So yeah, absolutely. So balance is one. So if we imagine, you're trying to lift, think of the heaviest weight you've ever lifted, okay, and imagine trying to lift that while you're on a moving bus. You're probably going to struggle. Yeah, so balance is an important thing when it comes to lifting weight. So yeah, absolutely, balance, super important. Anything else?
Force of movement.
Yep, absolutely. So you're chatting about force transfer?
Yeah.
Yep, cool. Force transfer, basically. So we might have this great ability to produce lots of force, but if we can't concentrate that force into the object that we're trying to move, then we're going to really struggle to lift it. And I always use this kind of description to visualize. So if I'm kind of punching my arm up and down like this, that force there is coming from my shoulder. Okay. Now, if I were to try and lift my other hand like this, but I've got a really wobbly wrist, okay, I can push as hard as I want, but I'm not actually going to be able to lift my other hand because I've got a really wobbly wrist. I've got like a weak link here. Okay, I'm still producing lots of force with the shoulder, but it's just not making it into my other hand because it's just getting lost there. Okay, so if I've got a really solid wrist, then I produce that force and then I can lift my other arm up and down. Okay, so this is why we want to think about force transfer whenever we're lifting. So we talked about kind of squats and deadlifts, how we might want to kind of brace your abdominals, brace your core in order to keep your spine really solid. So your spine's a great piece of kit and it's really kind of bendy and mobile. It can move around a lot. And this is really useful when it comes to day-to-day movements and just general functionality. But whenever we're trying to hang a weight off of our shoulder blades, if we're holding a deadlift bar, or if we've got the weight up top when we're doing a squat, we need to actually get all the force that we're producing with our legs. So with your hips and your knees, we need to get that force into the barbell. So this is why we brace the core, we brace the abdominals, we try and get all of this stuff really nice and solid and rigid. And that means all the force we produce can actually make it into the barbell. So this is applicable to bench and military press as well, but it's not necessarily quite as obvious. And so we want to be thinking about preventing unnecessary or unproductive movement. So we've got, I notice this every time, by the way, I'm missing a bracket there and I always forget to pop it on. So I'll try and remember this time around, but if not, we'll see it again in 3 months. So yeah, so force transfer, we're trying to prevent unnecessary or unproductive movement. Super important. And what you guys can do whenever we're looking through videos or whenever you're kind of visualizing it, have a think about what that unproductive movement might be and what movement are we trying to prevent, and then we can think about kind of what we use in order to prevent that movement. And then balance. So we've got COM, which is center of mass, and BOS, which is base of support. So these are your two kind of components of balance. Okay, so if you imagine like a wine glass, I like to use as an example. So you've got the center of mass, which is the kind of cup bit that's holding all of the wine or whatever liquid you've got in it, and then you've got the base, which is just that. It's the base of support, and you can imagine that you could fill that with a really heavy liquid. So imagine filling a wine glass full of lead or something like this, right? And you can imagine that's going to make it significantly heavier. But if you've got a really broad base, it's going to be really stable despite that. Okay, so if we can make the top heavier and we can shrink the base, then we're making that less and less stable. Then if we make the top lighter and we widen the base, these are two things that can make it more and more stable. Whenever we're lifting, all we're trying to do is keep the center of mass, so the heaviest object, or on average where the most weight is, we're trying to keep that above the base of support, so whatever is underneath it and supporting it. So if we're doing a squat and it's a really heavy squat, we've got a big barbell on our backs, then the center of mass is basically the barbell. Okay, so it's attached to you. So all of your mass and the barbell's mass on average is pretty much centered around the barbell itself. Okay, and then the base of support is your feet that are on the floor. So you can imagine if you're squatting and you leant back too much, then you wouldn't actually be able to kind of fight that, and you'd end up either falling or you'd step back. Okay, and if you stepped back, what's that doing? It's moving your center of mass. Sorry, it's moving your base of support backwards a little bit to get back underneath that center of mass. So all we're doing whenever we're lifting, we're trying to balance. If we can't balance, then we're not going to be able to actually lift the thing. Okay, these concepts making sense?
Yep.
Great stuff. Good. Okay, so talking about bench press balance. Okay, so we're going to look for base of support and center of mass in a bench press. Would you like me to bring the video back? Yeah, so not yet. Cool. I'll do that. So we're going to look, where is the base of support and where's the, oh, I hope you didn't see that. Maybe you did. If you did, you can shout out the answer. So where are we seeing is the center of mass? I'm just going to pause it at the top there. So where are we seeing is the center of mass?
Barbell.
Barbell, absolutely, yeah, good. And where is the base of support?
Shoulders and feet.
Your back, shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, shoulders. So shoulders are stuck onto the bench, so they're basically your base of support there, yeah, good. And they're stuck into the bench, and then the bench itself, together with your feet and all the rest of it, comes the like kind of base of support at the floor. But yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at this kind of moving portion here, and so we've got the center of mass, which is effectively the barbell, and then base of support, which is shoulder blades. So that's why we were saying before, I think it was yourself, Liz, that said what we're trying to do is balance the barbell, or keep the barbell whenever at the top of the movement there, directly above the shoulder blades. Okay, can we imagine what would happen if you were doing a bench press? So imagine I'm doing a bench press here. Okay, so obviously I'll be flipped there 90 degrees, but if we imagine if I was to bring it too far this way, what would happen then?
Probably drop on you.
Yeah, probably drop on me. Yeah, right. So we've got much stronger muscles here, and when we're all balanced, we've got much stronger muscles and shorter levers. As soon as we move it here, instead of relying on short levers together with your triceps, your front delts, your lats, your pecs, all these big strong muscles, instead of relying on all of those working together, we're suddenly just relying on pretty much your front delt by itself, which is a relatively small muscle, maybe a little bit of side delt as well, and a really long lever. So at which point it becomes way too heavy. So I would not be able to do anywhere near what I can bench press to do like a lat pullover with. So if it's too far back, that'll be a lat pullover, or if it's kind of the other way, it would be a weird kind of front raise type movement. So you would not be able to do these movements with a straight arm with the weight that you can bench press. So really important that we try to keep it balanced above your shoulder blade throughout. Yeah, really good. Good. So yeah, top of the back, shoulder blades. So this whole kind of top portion here, basically, but on your back, and then center of mass of the barbell. Really good stuff. Okay, so we're looking for force transfer, and I'm going to chat you through this one. So whenever we're trying to get a good force transfer on a bench press, we want to try to keep your upper back muscles really flexed. And it's one thing me saying flex your upper back muscles, but it's quite a kind of broad thing. So the best kind of cue for this is to keep your chest pushed up nice and high. Okay, so we can all try this now. So just as you're sat still, okay, without leaning back at your hips. Okay, so what you can do, you can actually put your hands at the crease of your hips, okay, and just try and feel that you're not actually leaning back at your hips. So without leaning back, if anything, you can actually lean forwards a little bit. Okay, and you should feel like a little bit of pressure in your hands there if they're at the front of the hips. Okay, so without leaning back, you're just going to try and push your chest up to the ceiling. as much as possible. Okay, a couple of you leant back there, so I don't want this. I don't want you moving any further away from the camera, so stay as close to the camera as you currently are, and push your chest up toward the ceiling. Okay, and you'll start to feel muscles in kind of the middle of your back, middle of your spine working in order to do that. It's the kind of anti-slouch muscles. Okay, so these are the muscles that we want to keep really flexed whenever we're doing a bench press. Whenever you've got a lot of weight here and you're kind of lowering it, your chest is going to naturally want to dip down and it's going to want to lower. This does two things. First of all, it makes you less stable. Maybe three things actually. So it makes you less stable. It's moving your kind of base of support across a little bit. So you can imagine somebody's really arched up onto their shoulder blades and then their chest is coming down. You can see how that's kind of rolling a little bit more onto the flat of your back. So it's moving that base of support around, which is not going to help from a balance point of view. And also because your chest gets lower, means you've got further to move that barbell. Okay, which is not a good thing when we want to be thinking about lifting as much weight as we can. Range of motion, good for hypertrophy, maybe a little bit less so when it comes to lifting as much weight as possible. So we can chat about the kind of balance that we want to find there a little bit later on. We want to keep shoulder blades pinned onto the bench. So this is a really good point that was made earlier. So keeping shoulder blades pinned onto the bench. Why do we think we need to do that?
Better force transfer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So how would that help the force transfer? Sorry, yeah, absolutely.
So if your shoulders they're directly under the bar, the shoulders are pinned back, so you've got a nice solid foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that solid foundation. So that kind, you might have heard of things like ground reaction force and all the rest of it. So if you wanted to try and jump up into the air as high as you could, which direction would you push with your legs?
Down.
Down, absolutely. Yeah. So if we want something to move up, we have to push down. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You've probably heard about that. So same kind of idea here. So if we want to get that barbell moving upwards, we have to put a lot of force downwards into that bench. And we can only do that realistically if our shoulders are really glued onto the bench. And so if you all put your hands up in front of you like a zombie like this. Okay, and what I want you doing is thinking about, with a straight arm, trying to pull your shoulder back like this with a straight arm. Quite a difficult one, quite a weird one. And you can couple that motion with pushing your chest up like I showed you before. Okay, pull those shoulders back with a straight arm as far as you can possibly get them. Pull them back, pull them back, pull them back. Good. Push your chest right up. Good. Quite uncomfortable, right?
Yep.
Cool. So that's why I'm so red in the face getting off the bench there. So even if I'm benching an empty barbell, I'm still putting lots of effort to try to maintain that kind of rigid position. And this just prepares me quite nicely for whenever the weight is a little bit heavier. It means I don't have to do anything differently. So keeping those shoulders pinned onto the bench. And I also like to think about it, if you've got your chest up like this and we want to be balancing the barbell above your shoulder blades, we want your shoulder blades to be down away from your ears. Okay, so we want the shoulders to be here. We want them to be down away from the ears, and that kind of wedges your shoulder blades down underneath that high point of your chest quite nicely, which means that the barbell is going to touch that high point on your chest and it's less range of motion, nice solid positions. Okay. We also want to think about, and this isn't something that you necessarily have to do, and I actually don't do this, but I've got another way of achieving the same thing, which I'll chat you through, but we want to grip the barbell in the heel of the hand, so the weight is stacked above the bones of the forearm. So if you can imagine here, if the barbell is too far back in your hand, so if the barbell is kind of here, you can see you've got that little bit of wiggle room. Okay, so that's probably going to impact your force transfer a little bit, and it's probably going to be super uncomfortable in the back of your wrist here because there's going to be a lot of compression when you've got a heavy weight. And that movement there, see if you just take your wrist as far as it will go back. Okay, you'll probably feel that kind of hard feeling where it just can't go any further. That's called like a hard end feel. And this is basically like a bone on bone thing. So if we've got a bone on bone contact there and then we're just really compressing it, your wrist is going to get quite annoyed at you pretty quickly. So what we like to do with the bench press is grip the bar more here through the heel of the hand. Okay, so it sits more above the bones of the forearm. It's okay to have your wrist bent back. In fact, it's necessary to have your wrist bent back, because if it's straight, that barbell is just going to fall straight off. Okay, so your wrist has to be bent back a little bit, but think about getting that bar stacked above the bones of the forearm. Okay. Now, the way that I do it, I've got quite a wide grip on the bench, which we can chat about later, but I've got quite a wide grip, which means my wrists naturally have to be a bit bent back anyway. And I also prefer to grip the bar a little bit higher in the hand and let that hand fall back. So all the things I've just told you not to do. I personally prefer that. It feels more comfortable for me during the pressing, so the actual movement itself feels better. But I wear wrist straps around my wrists to give myself that support, so I can actually relax my wrist and basically let the barbell sit on that kind of support of the wrist strap, and that works quite nicely for me. But if I was doing a closer grip, I probably wouldn't bother with wrist straps, because I wouldn't have to, because my wrist wouldn't be that bent back, and I'd probably have a bit more on the bones of the forearm. When I'm doing things like dumbbell presses and what have you, I tend to just grip it more in the on the heel of the hand, bones of the forearm there. Okay, but either way, we're trying to achieve the same thing, which is a solid, immovable, comfortable, well, not necessarily comfortable, but secure, let's say, position for the barbell to be in. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good. And you can mess about lots of different types of grip. Some people quite like a bulldog grip on the bar, which is where we take the hands and we turn them in a little bit. So if you can imagine the barbell's going through here, people turn their hand this way, so the barbell travels a little bit through that little ridge there. Okay, and then they're kind of gripping fingers down on top of the barbell. So that's called a bulldog grip, because you see bulldogs, whenever they're walking, they'll have that like kind of internally rotated position on the front legs. So I think that's where it got its name. Bulldog grip can be quite comfortable for some people don't like it so much, so it takes a little bit of experimenting with, and if you're ever not sure, let me know and we can go through it. Have we got any questions so far, guys?
No.
Good stuff. Okay, so we'll chat through all of the stuff that we've just seen there whilst we look at the video, and then I'll cover a couple more points and we'll move on to military press. Okay, so again, we can see that shoulder is glued onto the bench there. Okay, and we can see as well that shoulders are kind of away from my head or away from my ears. You probably can't see too well, to be fair, but I've got my shoulders there pinned as far this way as possible, and that's what kind of contributes to that extended position a little bit. Okay, so I've got the shoulders pinned down onto the bench and pushed this way a little bit. Okay, and I've also got upper back muscles nice and tight, so I'm pushing that chest up at all times. So a really nice cue for this, and you can make a wee note, because this is a really common cue that I use on bench press, is think about, instead of lowering the barbell, think about pulling your chest upwards as if you're trying to pull your chest up to the bar, instead of thinking about lowering the barbell down to your chest. It's a really nice cue, and it really helps to cue that chest to stay nice and high as you're coming down. So a lot of the time people are let to drop the chest down as that bar comes down. So you want to think about doing the opposite. You want to think about almost trying to bring your chest upwards to meet the barbell, and it won't go up, but what this does is prevent it from going down. That makes sense? Yeah, cool. Okay, so we can see I've got quite a wide grip, and you can see I've got, you can probably just about make it out there, quite a bent back wrist position, as I said, so that's why I wear those wrist straps, and I've got lots of that material kind of packed in over the wrist joint at the back there, and it just gives me lots of support, so I can kind of get away with doing that. Okay, and then as we were saying before, that's nice and balanced, so barbell's balanced above the shoulder blades. Okay, so these are all the things that we've just been through there. We're going to chat about different grips that you can use, and we'll chat about different kind of arch positions, leg drive, all this sort of thing. Before I do that, anybody any questions? Cool. Okay, so is it dangerous to arch your back?
No.
No.
No, I would say generally speaking, no. If you've got a healthy spine, if you don't have back injuries that are exacerbated by extension, then it's absolutely fine and safe to arch your back and to extend your back like that. The only time where you might not want to do that is, well, a couple of times. So if you do have an existing injury or something that is sensitized by being in that position, then you might not want to get into that position in the first place, whether it's on bench press or whether it's just like day to day. You might, avoid lying on your front and all these sorts of things if you have like an extension irritated back injury. So if you don't have a healthy spine, if there's something going on that's exacerbated by this sort of position, then you're probably not going to want to do it. And then the other time is if you actually want to increase range of motion. So my position here, I've tried to to cheat as much as possible, basically, so I can lift the weight within the rules of my sport, and this lends itself particularly well to gaining strength, because it allows you to handle the most weight possible. So as efficient as you can be, or the more efficient you can be, the more weight you're going to be able to handle. If you can handle more weight more regularly, this is going to really help when it comes to gaining strength, because you're just going to be loading those tissues up with more load, essentially. So from this point of view, it's really useful. But when it comes to hypertrophy point of view, which is whenever we're thinking about kind of gaining muscle, so adding muscle tissue, or whenever we're thinking about just getting strong through range, this might not be the best way to do it. So it's nice to do a little bit of both. So you can do maybe a feet up variation. So if I put the feet up onto the bench instead of having them down on the floor, that's going to reduce the arch a little bit. What's something else that I could do there to increase the range of motion?
Bring your hands in together.
Absolutely, yeah. So we can see, I'll stand sideways onto you. So if I've got the grip out nice and wide, you can see my hands are closer to my chest. And then as the grip comes in like this, much further for me to go for that barbell to actually come down and meet the chest. Okay, so a closer grip definitely is going to increase range of motion. It's also going to train one muscle group a little bit more. Anybody know what that muscle group would be? It's working on both variations. All these muscle groups are working on both variations, but it's going to bias one muscle group a little bit more.
Triceps?
Triceps, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. So if we think about triceps, that's the muscle in the back of the arm, the one that extends your arm. Okay, so if we have a bit of a closer grip, we can see how sometimes the grip will come a little bit inside of the elbow. So you're going to have a lot more force trying to push that arm into a flexed position, which means that your tricep has to work much harder just from a leverage point of view. And it's also going through more range of motion. So as you come down, you're bending your elbow significantly more. So there's much more tricep work to do. I'll pull you back up again. So both from a kind of a leverage point of view and also just from a range of motion point of view, your triceps have to work pretty hard on close grip bench. So I quite like to do feet up close grip bench as like an accessory. So I neglect range of motion a little bit here in order to lift more weight. And so I like to throw in a little bit of feet up close grip or something along those lines to tick that range of motion box as well as. Okay, cool. So what about feet? What are my legs doing there? Don't necessarily focus on the movement as I press there. This is something that just kind of naturally happens. So just think a little bit more about what I'm thinking about leg-wise.
Is it there to like help you stabilize so you can push through if you need to? Yeah, because I think if the more nearer you have your feet and like your legs, if you have them further out, it's not going to be as supportive. So if you have them more in, like towards you, it's more supportive. I don't know, maybe I'm talking a load of, I don't know.
No, I don't know. So I think this is absolutely true for some people, and then for other people, they actually find that putting them out or putting them forwards is going to help, but it's all to achieve the thing that you're talking about there, which is that stable position. So you're absolutely onto the right track. So what Sally's chatting about there is basically you're using your legs to create this really solid bridge. So basically, if I was to cut the bench off here, okay, so if I was to cut it in half and I was to make that cut right where my cursor is, and then I was to remove this end of the bench and just take it out, my position shouldn't really change. Okay, I'm literally holding that much tension in my legs that I'm just kind of holding myself in that position. Okay, so I'm not really using this half of the bench a whole bunch. Okay, I like to think about maybe gripping it a little bit with the thighs, but I'm holding my legs really nice and solid for that bridge position there. Okay, and this contributes to forcing your chest up, and there's a little bit of a kind of chain reaction that goes on. So I think about pushing my heels down into the floor. It doesn't matter, by the way, if your heels can't reach the floor. The act of pushing them downwards toward the floor, that action is what's going to help you with your stability. So whether or not your heels can reach the floor, it's the act of driving them downwards toward the floor that's going to help with that. So I've got a relaxed ankle. If I don't have a relaxed ankle, I can't push my heels down. Okay, so if you imagine that you're on your tiptoes and then you just really tense up your calves, you won't get your heel down to the floor. Okay, so in order to get your heel down, you have to relax your calves a bit. It's the same thing here. We have to relax the ankle a bit to get that heel down to the floor. So I'm thinking about using all of the muscles up here, so my bum and quads, to kind of push downwards toward the floor. Okay, so what that's going to look like is my knee getting pushed down. So my knee might be here before I start pushing my heel into the floor, and then it might end up down here. Okay, so I think about pushing knees and heels down. So what joint actions happened when my knees got a bit closer down here? What joint actions gone on? And which joint has moved there?
That'd be your hip joint.
Definitely, yeah. So hip joints move. So if my knee has moved from here to here, so if you imagine that is my femur, my thigh bone. Okay, so that was up at this angle before, so it was here. Now it's been pushed down, so it's down here. Okay, so that's hip extension, right? So if I extend my hip, and I'm just going to do this on one side for you. So if you watch my back, okay, I'm going to start extending my hip. What happens to my back?
Arches.
Arches.
Arches, yeah, absolutely. So hip extension is paired with extension of your spine. Okay, so if my lower back arches, what happens to my kind of mid back?
It's pushed more into the bench.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll end up with that bit at the top there, pushed a bit more into the bench. Yeah. And if my lower back arches, you imagine that chain, that's also going to help my mid back to arch. So it's just that kind of chain reaction going through. So literally by driving our heels down into the floor, we've managed to get our whole backs a little bit more extended, obviously with the exception of right up top, because your neck's a little bit like this whenever you're benching. Okay, so all of this helps us to really extend our back and get our chest up nice and high and get into that really kind of solid position for pressing. What I want you to do is round your back forwards like that. Okay, keep it rounded and try to pinch your shoulder blades together behind your back with your back rounded.
You can't do it.
Quite hard, right? Okay, and then what I want you to do is just straighten up and then see if you can get your shoulder blades back.
Oh, you can do it.
Yeah, much easier. Good. So then we can kind of see that through driving the heels down toward the floor, that has basically extended the hip, which has extended the lower back, which has extended your kind of mid back, your thoracic spine, which has helped to facilitate that retraction and depression of your shoulder blades. Okay, so there's this big kind of chain reaction. So we just try to push our heels down into the floor. This is just going to help everything else fall into that really nice solid place. How does that sound, guys? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great stuff. Really good. Cool. Okay, cool.
Tristan, can I ask something?
Push again.
See, when you're positioning yourself to begin with, when you're lying flat on the bench, what part of your kind of shoulders to head should be underneath the bar?
Sorry, 1 second. Apologies, my laptop told me it was running out of battery. I didn't have it switched on at the plug. Sorry, I just had a big notification come up on my screen there. Could you repeat the last bit of the question for me there, Anne?
Yes, so it was just to sort of check the correct positioning of our body under the bar. Should it be like your shoulders, or where should you position yourself under the bar before you start?
Before you start, so yeah, so it's a really good question, and it depends on the bench setup itself. Okay, so what we said was we want the barbell to be directly above the shoulder blades when we're about to do the press, so when we've already taken it out. Okay, so we want to minimize that unrack as much as possible. We want to minimize the amount of motion that we have to do, so we don't want the bar miles behind you, otherwise it's really difficult to take it out.
Yeah.
As we were saying, you're not going to be able to pull over that much weight. So basically, if we look at the J cups, so that's these bits here that the bar kind of sits in, and so you'll see, in fact, I'll pause it just as I'm throwing it back at the end, and you'll kind of see. Okay, things gone. There we go. Okay, cool. So I've got it not quite that far back. It's about 1 inch further forwards than that before I unrack it, and I also really kind of push myself up onto into that arch position to help myself unrack. So there we go. So that's kind of roughly where I'd unrack it, and then I really use that leg drive and that arch, and I really push myself up onto my shoulders to take it out. So you basically want your shoulder blades on the bench just in front of where the J cups are. So that means that whenever you push that bar up to the top, it's not going to smash up the J cups, but you don't have to do this mad lift out where you're taking the bar from miles out behind you, because to be honest, whenever the bar gets heavy, you're just physically incapable of doing that, of unracking it. So yeah, we want to have the bar kind of reasonably close to us whenever we're kind of unracking like that, but just not so close that we're smashing the J cups. So it depends on the J cups themselves, basically. Cool. And what you can do, if you have the same bench set up every time, so if you go into the same gym, you can take a little bit of time to kind of figure out where that is in the gym that you go to, and then you can maybe come up with some other physical cue that's specific to that gym. So maybe it's like eyes under the barbell or mouth under the barbell, whatever it happens to be. So you're going to have a little bit of a mess about with it, but it is gym specific. So that'll change if you use a different bench setup.
Yes.
Sati.
Oh yeah, but I thought I was on mute, but I'm not. Okay, so basically, I just wanted to know, because I do the bench press, but I don't use a barbell, right? So is it better? I know obviously when you're going to lift more weight, you need to use a barbell. Should you basically use a barbell, or should I be using dumbbells to do it?
Yeah, so you're talking about this
Yeah, do that one. Yeah, do that one. But then is it better, or is it more support when you're doing it? Because obviously you've got that. As I go heavier, and I'm not going really heavy at the minute, but as I go heavier, it's, you know, instead of dropping those, you can, at least you've got when you're using the barbell, you've got that thing to prop it back on. That's what it's called, that. So is it better to use the one that video was showing earlier using the bar, or should I still carry on, or should I use the dumbbells?
Yeah, so there's no like you should do this or you should do that necessarily with this specific question. So you can get really strong and develop lots of muscle doing barbell bench press, and you can do the exact same using dumbbell bench press. The pros of dumbbell bench press, you can see it's more range of motion that I'm able to go through, and I'm able to hold it at a little bit more of a natural angle, so an angle that feels a bit nicer to my shoulders, to my wrists. Okay, so you can't have that rotation with the barbell. So these are kind of pros of doing dumbbell press. It's quite good just for general stability as well. So you can't do you can stabilize a barbell much easier than you can stabilize a dumbbell. So from a stability point of view, it's pretty good. And then I would say,
I was finding with what are you saying about stability? So I started doing them, so like, you know, near the end of the set, I'm like a bit wobbly, because it's like, I think I'm going to carry on with using the dumbbells, because I think it's easier. I think it'll be easier for me instead of like setting all it up with the bench and everything like that. So I think I'll just stay with that for the minute. But I just want to know.
No, that's fine. So the end of the answer there would be the pros of bench press is you can lift significantly more weight, which is really good when you're trying to get strong. So if you're trying to develop lots of strength using a barbell, really useful as well. So if you've got access to both, I would highly recommend that you use both. These are kind of pros and cons of each, right? But if you've got access to both, absolutely.
Sorry, because I've got the dumbbell, because I've just recently gone to a new gym. So you've got that set up, you know, the dumbbells, all the different weights. Then you've got the one machine that you were using. I don't know what it's called, you know, the one that you're doing the barbell on. But you've also got the Smith, is it the Smith machine that you can, you could do it on that as well, because it's got the little things on the, I don't know what they're called, the little things that you hang the barbell off. So it's a good gym. It's just the fact.
That's really good. No, it sounds like it's kitted out really well. So a Smith machine bench press, you can't apply all the stuff that we've taught here to that, just because it's a fixed range of motion, and on a bench press there'll be a slight backwards forwards movement. So Smith machine, whilst you want to do a lot of the same kind of stuff, it won't feel quite as natural, because it won't have that natural kind of arc to it. That's not to say don't do it, but definitely, like, if you've got access to a proper bench press with a barbell in a squat rack, all these sorts of things, like, I would absolutely use it. But dumbbells, a fantastic way of getting strong as well.
Okay,
cool.
Thank you.
Great stuff, no worries at all. So just in the interest of time, guys, so we've got about 9 minutes there just before the new group comes in. So I'm just going to fly through the rest of the tutorial here, and I'll quickly go through military press. So military press is a little bit less involved as well, and you've already covered a good bit of it, which is fantastic. So when it comes to dumbbell press, we've got a lot of the same things going on. So I'm still trying to kind of keep my chest arched up, just because it keeps your shoulders in that nice, really stable position for pressing. However, it's not kind of helping me to reduce range of motion or anything like that on a dumbbell press, because the dumbbells can just come down straight past my chest there. Okay, so it's not kind of bouncing off them in the same, or bouncing off the chest in the same way that a barbell would do. Okay, it's a bigger range of motion, or tends to be a bigger range of motion, and it tends to naturally be like a little bit more similar to a kind of close grip, because you can't take the dumbbells out, because it's like two separate centers of mass, essentially. So you can't take the dumbbells outside of your shoulder, because then that's going to start turning into a little bit more like a pec fly instead of a chest press. So it's going to be significantly kind of weaker to do that, whereas you can take a wide grip on a barbell, because it's not loading you up in the same way. So I'm just thinking about balancing the dumbbell right above my shoulder blades, basically, as I'm doing this. So I'm just thinking about coming straight down and straight up. Same on a barbell, we think about coming straight down and straight up, okay? And it will end up traveling slightly forwards on the way down and slightly backwards on the way up, just because of the way your shoulder blades and shoulder joint like to move. But if you think about coming straight down and straight up, that's all we really have to do. In terms of the angle that we hold it at, it doesn't matter hugely. So in terms of the angle that you're going to hold the dumbbells at, it doesn't matter hugely. Some people are going to prefer angling them in quite a bit. Some people are going to prefer angling them out. What matters is that it's comfortable for you and your shoulders, and you can go through a nice, good kind of range of motion with it. Okay, so that's all we're really thinking about with dumbbell press. Okay, so military press. What I'm going to do, in fact, I'll chat you through this quickly. So base of support is your feet whenever we're doing military press, and center of mass is basically moving in correlation with the barbell. So the center of mass won't really be the barbell unless you're mental strong. It's a really difficult exercise to get super strong at. So usually we won't be lifting for most people anywhere near kind of body weight or anything like that on a military press. So your center of mass will be influenced with the barbell, but it won't necessarily become the barbell in the same way that it would whenever you're kind of glued to the bench. So it's only really your arms, or the weight of your arms on the barbell that we're kind of comparing there. So it won't become center of mass in quite the same way. So it's going to move up and down in correlation with the barbell, but it won't kind of become the barbell in the same way. So in terms of balancing the bar, we kind of chatted already about forearms and keeping them vertical, and thinking about joint stacking. So joint stacking is basically when we have joints stacked on top of each other. So you guys are pointing out before the kind of straight line that's going up there. So if we look at shoulders, elbows, and wrists, all these are kind of moving up and down on that straight line, and they might come a little bit in front or a little bit behind, but on average they're kind of sticking to that line. We're trying to stack the joints on that line as much as possible, and we're trying to work as close to a piston as we can whenever we're doing these kind of pressing movements. Obviously your body won't quite work like that, but that's what we're trying to almost replicate whenever we're doing these types of pressing movements. So in terms of the force transfer, we want to keep abdominals quite tight whenever you're pressing. So whenever you press, the weight of the bar likes to kind of push you down like this. So it likes to push you into that kind of arched position, which means that you're not moving the weight upwards, it's kind of moving you downwards. So we want to keep everything quite flexed and prevent a little bit of an arc back is okay before we press, but we want to try to prevent getting pushed further into that position, because then our force isn't going into the barbell going up, it's going into us getting pushed down. So we want to keep abdominals nice and tight, try and stay pretty rigid, and just think about driving that barbell up away from your chest. Okay, and we want to stay braced and keep your bum squeezed. Okay, so tense up your bum whenever you're doing a military press, and it's just going to keep everything nice and stable down at the bottom of your back there. So it's going to keep your pelvis and everything nice and stable. You don't have to completely squeeze it to the point that your pelvis is tilting underneath you. Just keep it kind of tight and kind of solid. Okay. So we can see all that happening there. So got the bum squeezed, got the legs nice and solid, got the forearms vertical, and you can see that your head almost gets in the way whenever you do military press. So what we like to think about is moving it out of the way of that barbell on the way down. So if I kept my head, which I'll pause it, sorry, if I kept my head there, when that barbell comes down, I've got two options. I can either smash myself in the head, or I can move that barbell down in front of me, and then my forearms end up facing the wrong way. So I don't want either of these options happening. So I've got to pull my head out the way. So almost imagine on the way down, I'm kind of giving myself a bit of a double chin like this. So I'm kind of pulling back. It's not the most glamorous, but it puts you in a nice solid position for pressing. So as you come down, think about the barbell moving in that nice solid bar path and pulling your head back out of the way. Okay. So that's essentially why you're getting that slight backwards and forwards movement. I'm just moving my head out of that optimal bar path. Okay, in terms of the grip, you probably want a reasonably narrow grip on this. If you come out too wide, it's going to feel really awkward for your shoulders as you come towards the bottom. So a reasonably narrow grip, usually somewhere around shoulder width, maybe a little bit wider, works quite well for most people, but have a play about with it. Some people will prefer narrower, some people will prefer slightly wider. So shoulder width is a good place to start, and then you can kind of mess about with it from there. Okay, and you can see I'm keeping my chest up quite a bit here as well. So that slight thoracic extension. Okay, so that's a little bit of an arch in the upper back there. Keeps your shoulder blades in a nice, comfortable, solid position for pressing. Okay, in terms of your breathing, which was what Sally mentioned before, you're going to be at your most solid if you're holding your breath and you've got that intra-abdominal pressure. So whenever you're on light weights, you don't need to worry about it too much. And obviously, if it's been like contraindicated by your doctor or anything like that, if they said we don't want these kind of spikes in blood pressure by holding breath or anything like that, then we don't want you doing that. Okay, but for the most part, it's okay to hold your breath whenever you're lifting. It helps you to increase that kind of intra-abdominal pressure, which keeps you nice and solid and nice and rigid. So the way I like to breathe on a military press, well, I didn't breathe at all for that demo there, but if it's a little bit heavier and it's slowing down a little bit, I'm going to need to rebreathe. So I breathe at this point here. Okay, so that's a little rest point almost at the top there. And so I would kind of rebreathe at that point, and then I hold the breath and we'll come down, up, and I'll breathe out and in and do the same thing. It's exactly the same for bench. So rebreathe whenever you're at the top of the movement. The trouble is if we breathe out whenever we've got the bar here at the bottom of the movement, if I was to breathe out here, what tends to happen is we're in this position, I breathe out, and we end up with that happening again. So the forearms tilting forwards and losing that kind of really solid, rigid position. So that's where you would rebreathe if you need to, and you can hold your breath for a few reps if you want. Obviously, if for whatever reason your GP has told you not to be holding breath or doing anything like that would kind of overly spike blood pressure, then it's absolutely fine just to focus on the movement and the bracing. It just might be a little bit more challenging to do so. We maybe couldn't handle quite as much weight, but there's lots of ways to progressively overload. But either way, we want to stay nice and kind of tight in those abdominals to keep that solid position. Okay. All right, guys. So hopefully all of that makes sense, and we'll have to wrap up there because we've got a new group coming in. But if you do have any questions, anything like that, then pop it across to me on Telegram, and I'll get back to you there. But thanks very much for your contributions tonight. Really, really good, and you answered most of the questions, most of the points that we went through before we even started tonight. So you're doing absolutely grand, guys. Really well done. Have a lovely evening, and we'll catch you next time.
You.
Thanks, Tristan.
Thank
Cheers now. See you later.
very much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.